Hello.
Uh,
How's it going? How's week been?
yeah, good. Not too hectic. Oh, hi, Martin.
Hello.
Saying what?
Hey.
Pamela is not coming today. Pascal also not. They're both busy. I think we are still waiting for Sergey.
No, I'm here. Sergey's supposed to be coming. I'll give him a ping 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, we can give him 2 more minutes. Then we start. Okay. Complete. Oh, let's get started. Oh, hi everyone. Let's start the meeting by acknowledging that by attending this meeting, we are all agreeing to the GraphQL Spec Membership Agreement and the GraphQL Foundation Code of Conduct. Let's do a quick round of introduction in the order of the agenda. I'm Michael, and I'm the host today.
Hey, I'm Derek from Apollo.
Sergey from Wondergraph.
David from Wondergraph.
Shane from Apollo.
And Martin from Apollo.
Awesome. So I have put two things on the agenda. We have lots more to discuss around satisfiability, but move these topics to the next week. So Carmen and Pascal are there as well.
Yeah.
So there's one thing that I'm pushing now for in the main spec. This is for named schemas. Let me share quickly the detail in the specification. So in the specification, we mentioned that there is a name for each schema, right? So each schema has a unique name, but we don't mention where this is and where this lives and where you have to store that. And ideally, the input of each subgraph, the schema, is everything that we need. And the idea I came up with, that's also around merge order, right? That's a follow-up we can talk about. Is so a while back, we introduced actually descriptions for schemas so that you can put a description on the schema. That also was a core spec change. And ideally, we would have on the schema an optional name now as well. I talked to Benji about that, and he's also open because it is not only for the composite schema spec good to have a schema name. It's also in multi-schema scenarios where a GraphQL server has two schemas, and you can basically identify these schemas from the document. So what we're gonna push for is that the core spec will allow this. At the same time, we need also backward compatibility, because nobody will just implement it. It will probably take a fair amount of time until we have that. But I think it looks neat, and is where actually the schema name should live, right? We could have, in the meantime, a directive called just add schema name. That would be the simplest thing, but there were also discussions around should we have metadata in the schema documents so you can store things. I'm a bit, I have thought about that, but there's also, what do you do with custom metadata that not everybody else understands? I don't know. And what do you guys think?
Well, so there's a need for metadata, right? Some way, one way or another, right? Yeah, I would imagine if some server doesn't understand this metadata, that specific functionality would be just ignored. Some additional like functionality that we talked about before, right? Is how do you what sort of batching do you support, right? So like the simplest mechanism it is to, and that's what we've been thinking about, is to add the directive on the schema itself. So say I support variable batching, right? I support request batching, kind of thing. So then this communicates to your to your runtime that this is actually supported and you can use it in query planning or whatever. I use those features. If we have some additional features there, maybe something else, right? But as I said, there was the general discussion around how to surface this metadata. So directives are a built-in mechanism, right? So having them on a schema seems like a nice place. But there was also some other discussions, I think, what it was like last year or sometime before, with the pragmas and other stuff that is actually more generically in the documents. So I'm not sure what is the long-term way, but definitely directives on a schema is the simplest way to get it going right now.
And
Yeah, I forgot about the runtime metadata, so that's helpful. But I immediately thought there's a couple different metadata things that we'd want to like clarify, because there's like just metadata that people want to have internally on their schemas that maybe they want to see for maybe this internal to their company or their users or whatever that is. There's the possible metadata that like implementations might want to do themselves when they have directives that are outside the feature set that they would need at like composition time to like know, for Apollo Federation, like we have like some cost directive where like, we're not putting that in the composition spec, right? So like we would need some, the contact directive, exactly, things like that, right? It's like your platform stuff. Like we would want that, like, those are just directives that we have and specify. But like, are those needed for like composition, just information, or the other type of metadata I would want to, you would probably want to specify, or things we'd want to clarify, is metadata that does need to propagate its way up to the final composed artifact of the supergraph that like then the runtime would need to like know to have that information. So there's like different categories of metadata too, not just like generally metadata. So there are like different types we want to consider supporting.
Martin?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all that. And I think metadata is a very complex topic that at the same time we can't really avoid keep avoiding. And I wonder, like it feels like we continue to sort of abuse directives for this purpose. And we keep adding to that. And there's various problems with that. One is that like not all metadata is metadata that like strictly belongs to like a user authored schema. like something like support for variable batching, for instance, is a property of the server or the gateway. It's not necessarily something that you would write as a schema author. And if you like deploy the same schema to a different server, there might be another transport or batching mechanism available. So we probably need a level of metadata that sort of applies to that. And then I'm not sure we've ever solved the problem of exposing even metadata in the form of schema directives. Like with Apollo, we currently have a sort of custom mechanism. And even if we get rid of underscore entities, we still have a need to like introspect a server, for instance, and get the complete schema with the directives on it. And as you know from discussions like going back many, many years, the relationship between directives and metadata isn't straightforward. It isn't clear what sort of the runtime status of directives is, especially schema directives. So I'm really wondering, should we pick this topic back up in sort of maybe even the main working group, because this ultimately is something that belongs to the core spec, I think.
Yes, and it's also a core topic of like what Benji proposed, like with structs and stuff around that.
Yeah.
It never reached the threshold where we went and said, okay, we have to do it, right? And I think mainly because it's so easy with directives to circumvent proper metadata. But it's true, like also for the, like there is also, and that's why specifying general metadata with directives feels so wrong, is there are different kinds, as you pointed out. For instance, transport capabilities. You could also inspect like the transport itself, like the GraphQL over HTTP transport could also have a way just to expose what features are supported. And it's not necessarily something that belongs in the schema, because the same schema could be running with different transport features. So that's why, like, I kept or my idea is to keep what we need as schema metadata very strict at the moment, but it's also at the same time, if we get in the main working group something going with proper metadata, it will take some time before all the subgraphs, before all GraphQL implementations will have this capability. That's why we always need kind of a fallback for that.
Yeah,
Okay,
I agree.
yeah, go ahead.
I agree that we probably should bring this discussion back to the working group. So maybe to bring it back to our issue about, we need to know the name of this schema file artifact thing, because you can refer to it inside the schema itself. You refer to that name. So let's say we don't do a metadata. We throw out some bad ideas so we can all like agree that like the direction we want to go. Like ways we could solve it is like on the schema, the schema type, like there's a specific format to the description or something, right? Like there's like a way that we can parse the description and read the file name, read the name of the thing there. We could have the file name itself be like, when you compose, like we specify like these are files and like there must be a file name, or like there must be like just some other described way that when you build, however you build, like you must also pass this in as input somehow. So like all those things we can do like externally to the schema. It can be in the schema. There's ways we can do it in the schema. Maybe to describe that, do we think the first thing should be, regardless of how it's done, do we want this name to be defined somewhere within the text of the file, or do we think it's better to keep it in outside and separate from the file itself, the contents?
So
Yeah,
the
I mean
way,
the only use
Go ahead.
case I can think of for like not wanting to do that is if you want to sort of reuse the same subgraph schema in multiple places. And I'm not sure if that's something that like happens or when it happens, but it's definitely a consideration, I think. Um,
but I think also a schema kind of has a topic, right? A schema is about something. You could put a name on that. That's why I thought it should be a part of the schema that says, okay, I'm the products catalog schema, for instance, or I'm the admin schema. Would also be as simple as that. And as we don't have that, it would be optional. But we could say if that goes into the main spec, we could say in the composite schema spec, we require it. So you have to provide it. To not have it in the, like, do you really think that the same schema is used twice under different namings?
well, I mean, if it's sort of a subgraph that you use in multiple supergraphs, maybe there's a naming conflict, for instance, in one of those supergraphs. That's it. That's the use case I was thinking of.
Yeah.
But now that I'm thinking of it, that seems like a prime use case for namespaces.
Yeah.
And if the schema name is like a name like any other name, like a type name in the same schema file, like the same naming mechanism, namespacing mechanism that we come up with would also apply to the schema name. So that
Yes.
could be used to resolve naming conflicts.
Yeah. That's another topic for the main working group, namespaces.
Yeah,
It's all these core problems we struggle with since
I
the
might
beginning.
need to start attending the core meetings.
Yeah, I mean we discussed it, but the problem is also you need a champion for it, and it's a lot of work to get that through. And sometimes people just stop for whatever reasons being a champion, and then these issues die. Um, anyway, okay, I agree on that. So I will go ahead, open up an issue on the main spec to get this name on the schema definition. Do it probably over the weekend, have to write it together, and then we put up a PR. In the meantime, we will still have this directive to abuse and bring in the schema name or legacy schemas.
Yeah. Now I'm just wondering, based on the history of how
Yeah.
the GraphQL spec is progressing, wouldn't the major objection of this would be that this is breaking stuff? So you have
It's
so
not
you,
breaking, right? Because the
well,
name
I mean
would be
the name of the schema, right? So the schema, whatever type afterwards, right? It's cannot be understood by the parsers as they are. So that's a breaking thing, right?
kind of like a breaking, like there are like every change to syntax is a breaking change. But it's not a breaking change in if you have an old schema that is parsable by everyone, and it's also parsable by the new thing. That's the main consideration around breaking changes. I mean, we also have had breaking changes with repeatable directives. The word repeatable cannot be passed by older GraphQL parsers. So this acceptable. Always important that like if you take a schema of today, then it must be working without any issues in the new world. But we cannot expect that newer syntax works in the old. And this way, it's not breaking. And we could get that probably in a reasonable amount of time. Although I wouldn't wait for it, right? Yeah. And so old schemas are compatible with new parsers. Yeah, exactly. That's correct. Okay. So then let's take that forward. I have another issue on the agenda. And this is about require. No, this is, oh, let's quickly, because we are on schema name. So that is just a side issue. So we also considered the merge order. And Derek said the merge order at the moment in Apollo Federation is just alphabetically, because at the moment we didn't specify this in the specification, and that's how we got to the naming thing in the first place. And at the moment, I would say if there is no reason to introduce something like this, like where you can override the ordering, I would just go ahead and take over the behavior that that Derek specified, that we have an alphabetical. We just take all the schemas, order them alphabetically, so that it's a stable order and it's predictable, a predictable merge outcome.
And then what types of merge rules are order dependent here?
We don't really think it is.
The descriptions. I think the only ones that are actually impacted by descriptions. So, and there's actually also
Yeah.
a difference in how
Yeah.
we do descriptions within Apollo Federation and GraphQL Federation. Because the order, if there are, so like in the spec right now, we say like pick the first one we encounter, right? So depending on the order, you're gonna have different things there. In the Apollo side of things, we actually count the number of times the different descriptions occur. So the one that happens the most, that's the one we pick. But you still can have, the two of them.
Yeah, you have two.
Right. So you still pick the first one, right? Like on the tiebreaker there. But it's as to my understanding, the only thing that actually changes here is the descriptions. There is a difference on how you could build your query graphs from those, depending on the order of how you process the subgraphs, right? Which can influence your query planning, the paths that you're gonna take there. But that's another thing for composition to build a super graph. I think it's only descriptions.
Yeah, and that's the main reason to do it with a stable order is that the client-facing schema, if you snapshot it or check it in, that you don't have changes between different composition tools. Like it would always be the same.
I agree that we should probably specify that there is an order, but do we need the core spec to specify what that order should be? Because if we say it should be alphabetical, then we're gonna force people to name their, AAAA. My schema should go on top.
Yes, you can. Exactly. You could even influence that if you probably something is wrong if you have to do that. But just that that it's kind of predictable and produces always the same thing between different tools, right? And the idea is not to have an order property, right? We just say, okay, a schema has a name, and we just order it alphabetically, and then there should be a stable outcome.
But we should only use that as sort of a tiebreaker. Like most of or like maybe even all rules should be ordered independent as much as possible.
Yeah, it's I think it's really just the descriptions that are problematic, as Derek pointed out. Sergey?
Yeah, but in case we want to order and have like stable outcome, we will also need to order the fields, because you could change the order of fields in different subgraphs or move the fields between subgraphs, and this will lead to different field settings and potentially in the different order. So it makes
like we don't need to order the fields, but you're correct. That's the second thing that changes, right? The order of the fields. If you take the set of the fields and take the natural order of the schema file, and you start merging the first field, then this also would have different ordering depending on the field. I think we should not force people to have it alphabetically. We just should let them have whatever. Okay.
Yeah, that was gonna be my comment. Like in the spec text that we're gonna write, I think we should specify that there can be an order to these documents. It is up to the builders or the implementation to let users to define an order, maybe however you choose that. But there is an order. Maybe we can say as a default, you may choose to use alphabetical by schema name or something. But I don't think we need to enforce that you do that or say that you should definitely use that as your default even. But just maybe give an indicator that this is what we do in our validations. But yeah, we definitely make sure that you can definitely not have to follow that alphabetical order if you want to.
I agree. We can, if you guys want, we can have a note there that an implementation can choose to have an option for alphabetical order if that is something you want to give to the user. So we can provide wiggle room for implementations to have an option, but I wouldn't force it in the spec. Okay. We'll comment that later in. Check if there are comments. Deterministic order, yes.
Yeah, like
Okay.
if you don't want to specify specific ordering there, let's just call it the schemas have to be merged in some deterministic way such that merging the schemas A plus B plus C is the same as C plus B plus A kind of thing. So you always get the same result, predictable results.
Yeah, I think if we specify it, it's easier to write the tests later against it, that we order them alphabetically.
Well, alphabetically is the simplest way, right? So this is
Yeah.
that's very simple, is very easy to
Yeah.
understand, right? And so but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just around this. I'm also thinking about the validation tests that we're gonna create for the spec. So and then the public facing schema, not the super graph, but the public facing schema, we should be able to snapshot, and it should be the same. Maybe some spacing. If you take all the white spaces away, it should be the same. Okay, let's move on to a more spicy thing, which is requires. And Derek opened an issue here, and that is around requires that have arguments themselves. And like arguments that you have to provide, right?
Yeah.
Should we be able to have requirements where we now can say, okay, we require X, and then you could put in this require directive constants, and later maybe also things from the context that we can have in requires.
Yeah, I mean, especially static values, that makes a lot of sense to me for enums, for instance. I mean, that's a common case, I think. But we could also support strings and numbers, obviously, booleans.
Yeah, that's a first. But if you think it further and you have like a context, then you could even have things that come from like maybe you store fields on the context and stuff like that. Similar to what Apollo is doing with the context, but it's kind of, we could make that very nice with requires suddenly. I mean, it's a bit into the future. We could start just with we allow constants.
So I raise it up because it keeps coming up every once in a while, and the behavior as it is right now, it's well, we only support like the the static stuff, and only works if those arguments are actually also like not required. So like if you have a required arguments, that actually also kind of has issues there. Because well, the problem is like
what issues?
I think there actually no. So if it's a required, I think you have to specify the static value there. I think that actually should work. But there are a number of issues with supporting the parameters on those. It's around like what if you have multiple selections of X with aliasing, and how do you actually? So that's basically what comes up is that there is a selection on subgraph A for X that passes the value, right? And based on the rules right now on the subgraph B, you would actually need to get an X with the default that actually, since you don't provide it, so it would actually be null. So again, it's a separate, like they have an aliasing clash on the implementation right now that, well, at least that we have.
So are you thinking of a situation where like there's one argument with a require on it where you have X with one parameter and then another with another argument with a require on X with another parameter, and then when you fetch X, we need to alias it in the subgraph
Yeah,
fetch.
it gets very complex. Like if you have multiple of those, right? It's you can craft the very complex scenarios very easily. So simple cases work. It's just like it gets complicated very fast.
But you would kind of do this thing here if it were required, right?
Yeah.
And then whatever 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Yep.
But now if you have on Y, if you have like X1 and X2.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because you have maybe a B, and B requires it with
Oh
4,
yeah,
5, 6.
or even like a second argument on Y, like you have X and then X1 and X2.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. Then you would have the problem that you need to create aliases on the subgraph fetch.
Yeah.
But that's
So
okay, or?
Yeah.
And it is, but it is something we would need to specify, I think, as a requirement.
Yeah. No, at the moment, the current spec text doesn't allow that, or we didn't forbid it, but we kind of
have a validation. I don't think we have
Yeah.
validation says that prevents this. So
yeah. Exactly. We don't forbid it, but we didn't specify that this is possible. And we need to update the spec text to say, okay, you can do this, and like have examples for these scenarios, and also have validation rules that we need validation rules because we need to find if in this case param would be required, right? We would need to fail here the composition. Like if param were required, right?
Yeah.
And this is a validation rule that we need to add. Yeah, that's validation.
So and again, so right now we do support like the static values, right? So you can actually pass the arguments there, right? That's on a Poe Federation. But folks were asking for dynamic values, right? So the ability to specify something.
Yes, and I can immediately, right? And I can see the value, but let's put that on version 2. Let's get version 1 finished. Could also be 1.1, like because every feature we add makes the initial satisfiability more complex.
Totally. It's just the question. So what do we want to support? So we want to say we don't support this. We want to say we support it in a way that you can do a static values and kind of like what we do at Apollo, or what do we want to do there?
But at the moment, just to GraphQL. At the moment, we have here require. And the thing that we would allow, and for this, we have to update the selection map syntax that we have. It's one thing. it has to fit in all the constructs. Like we already have these, like when we create objects and stuff like that. So this thing must go into the selection map syntax. At the moment, we don't, like the parser would fail if we have this kind here. And so as I understand, what we want to initially just allow is statics like this. And how would you do dynamics, like without a context at the moment?
I don't think we
Follow-
support dynamic.
We
Okay.
don't support dynamics.
No.
No.
Okay. Yeah, because like I already thought about it, and I also talked a bit with Martin about that. Like what I think would be really, and the syntax allows it, right? We could at some point introduce something like a dollar or whatever, where we have context and can access from there things and then inject it through. However, we design that in the end. But with the syntax that we have, we can, I think, add these features very quickly once we have the initial spec in there. So, but for now, we stick with the statics, and that would also match the feature basically of Apollo. Like we allow static values. Required must be provided. And if all arguments are optional, you can just leave them away and you can just specify X here.
Well, but there's also there's also some problems around aliasing also, because like if you have it like this, right? So field an X, or the other one as well. So if I require an X, right? But in subgraph A, I pass the value to X. So that is a different X that is going to be passed to the require there. And same thing, like if you have the static value there, it's also going to be potentially different than the one from subgraph A, right?
Yeah. Which is okay. I mean, there is you can alias with cryptic names, and there is a potential for a collision theoretically, but in real world use, I think it's okay to alias. David?
Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, what about require chains, where the thing you require also has a require directive on it, and that could go
That's
on.
okay. That's okay. Like you have to have a loop detection, but this is it could also be with the key, right? The key, you require a key. This is already a required change if you think about it. You require a key. The key has requires on it, so you have to again get data for that, and that thing could also have a requires. Like but you have to, then you just resolve it, and you need to have a loop detection.
Well, actually, it should just fail though, right? That should be an error. Because if you looking at one single subgraph B, I have this field called Y, and I use the require on the first argument.
Yeah.
As soon as this goes to the supergraph, let's say where there's no other loops or connections, it gets hidden away, right? The argument doesn't exist anymore.
So if we had this, right? Let's get C in here. C. We have foo. Let's not look at the keys. Yeah. It doesn't matter. So here we have Z. That is another string. Has no arguments. So now we have a requirement like Y requires X requires Z, which is okay.
No, that's what I was.
Why not?
Because just ignore all the other directives for a second. Just look at subgraph A, right? So we have this param, this input parameter, and we say this parameter is actually the value that comes from Z on subgraph C. So take the value of Z and use it as the parameter input here.
Yeah.
Right. Oh wait, and I'm thinking backwards. So that hides the, okay, this should work actually, because then what we're effectively, when the supergraph ends up, the supergraph compose the API schema, like nobody would see that X has a parameter input. They wouldn't see it. It would just be a field with no parameters inputs. So to other subgraphs, it should also appear that way too. Like there's no arguments. So you shouldn't be able to, what we need to validate then is on line 10, you shouldn't be allowed to specify arguments to X, even though technically, like if you just look at the schema, you wouldn't have it because it's effectively like hiding the argument to all
Yeah,
their
that
subgraphs.
that makes sense because yeah, that makes sense.
And we do need loop detection. Like on line 4,
Yeah.
if you require field Y,
And that
on line
requires
4,
that's what I mean. Like you need loop detection, and this also we can do that in the satisfiability. I mean, you still implement it in the execution, just if the tool was messed up, but it's already satisfiable at build time. And this is a good, let me just note that down so I can add that as an issue later, because we need also require. Okay. Yeah, that's additional validation rules, but that's good points that we I think we don't have yet because we didn't have validated anyway, or we didn't think about arguments here. And that's why we have no rules that ensure things like that. Okay, in this case, you are not allowed to use an argument because it's already requirement defined here. David?
Sorry, one other point. This at required directive, you cannot. Is this one specifically just for arguments, or it can also go on the field level?
No, so direct. We don't have any on the field level.
Okay, it's only on arguments.
It's only on argument.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And it needs to translate to an input, so it wouldn't really work on a field level.
Yeah, there is. 1 second.
Apollo Federation has one that goes on the field level, which is called requires with an S. So there's definitely going to be some confusion around that.
But also it also allows us to migrate. Like you can have an Apollo, like you can mix the schemas. No, but okay, there is this guy here, field map, the appendix A. I don't know if you have read it, David, which describes the syntax, like also requires and is basically use the same syntax to specify how an output translates to an input. And we got to update that so we also support here arguments.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. That's a bit what I had for the agenda. Anybody has something else or wants to discuss a bit more on this? Go ahead.
Sorry,
go ahead, David. You first. Mine is just an FYI.
I had a crack at a rudimentary representation of an algorithm for satisfiability. I stuck it in Slack for now. I think it needs a lot more work. It doesn't cover all the bases, and it's definitely not. It doesn't. Ironically, it's not fully satisfying the agenda, so it's not complete. But I don't know. It's a starting point. I think it's going to be quite the effort to make something robust and kind of all-encompassing. All-encompassing. But I had a go for now. If anyone has any disagreements or any comments, or how we can kind of represent that you can go from entity A to B, but not from B back to A and things like this, things start get a little bit complicated, because you can have routes from one subgraph to other subgraphs that don't necessarily translate. They could be one directional, they could be multi-directional, and it's difficult to kind of define that in a kind of this type of algorithm. But anyway, I made a start. Sorry?
It depends on how you see the algorithm. Like if you could describe it as a directed graph from the root types. But yeah, I saw it. I just didn't bring it up because like Kamil and Pascal are also working a lot on this. And I think next week is a good point to discuss that, because then everybody is there that is also working on satisfiability.
Yeah, perfect.
Shane?
I just wanted to share a blog announcement in case everyone here hasn't seen it, since it's topical and relevant. So Apollo is deprecating our Fed1 implementation sort of officially now. It's technically it's been supported, but you haven't been able to like create Fed1 stuff. Just wanted to like put that out there, but we want to focus. I think everyone agrees that we're focused on Fed2 semantics and everything. I don't think we need to worry too much about this since we're going there, but we're just sort of officially sort of retiring the Fed1 implementation as we go and build our next implementations.
But to clarify, the super graph, not the sub.
Yeah, the super graph. You can still do Fed1 syntax on your subgraphs and everything, but yeah, there's a lot of details we have to work with our customers about this. But just for clarification, I want to help everyone here. We're using Fed2 syntax for all this stuff. Like we want to make sure we're Fed2 backwards compatible, which means that we would be Fed1 backwards compatible. But FYI for everyone, since it's topical.
Yeah, but that's also where we looked at, right? We never, or I never considered the.
Yeah. Well, it was always based on Fed2.
Yeah.
So by Fed1 supergraph, do you mean a supergraph that is composed with entirely version 1 subgraphs with a version 1 composer, or?
Correct. Yeah. So what we're deprecating,
like a legacy composer.
What we're deprecating is the Fed1 composer.
Right. Okay.
Not the Fed1 syntax or subgraphs or libraries or anything. The Fed2 composer can parse and read and understands Fed1 schemas because the syntax is backwards compatible. So what we're deprecating is the Fed1 composer and technically the Fed1 query planner as well. But that we don't need to worry about that in this group either.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is also one for David May. I don't know if you are aware of this. We also decided not to specify the supergraph configuration. So there will be whatever configuration you want to have. It's also something that aligns with things that Hasura, for instance, does, because they have a completely different configuration format for their sort of federation. And to allow like the flexibility in having custom configuration, the spec describes how to compose the outward facing schema, and also has some functions in the algorithms that kind of define the metadata you must preserve without specifying how the metadata will look like. So technically, somebody could come and write a YAML file, and this YAML file is the input for the gateway. I'm not recommending that, but that is fully okay.
Sorry, are we discussing the? I forget the terms. There's the schema API. No, so the API schema, and there's the supergraph schema.
So we have the composite schema.
Yes.
Like in the spec, we have something we call the composite schema. That is the composed schema, and that is what the public API is in Federation.
And this one is with the encoding directives. Like
no,
that's without the encoding directives.
That's what the merge algorithm produces.
Okay.
We specify what kind of metadata you need for the satisfiability, but technically you could also have like the public facing schema, the API facing, the client API facing schema. You could have this, and on your gateway you have all the subgraphs, and this is how you preserve your schema. It's up to you, right? And this allows for flexibility. For instance, Apollo has a lot of non-GraphQL features nowadays also, like for instance, REST, like with the connectors. And this is not part of the specification. And this is where each vendor can put their own stuff in.
Okay. So thank you.
Just because we talked about supergraphs. Awesome. Okay, with this, we can conclude the meeting, I think. And we see us next week, and then everybody will be back, I think.
Sounds good.
Awesome. See you guys.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.